Hi, Andy Eastwood here, welcoming you back to the Octopus Ukulele Academy, and I'm back in the studio today because I need the swivelling chair for this one to show you some different angles. Adrian Terrel says, I'm a guitarist who has recently got into playing the ukulele. Are there any tips or bad habits to look out for when transferring to the smaller instrument? Thanks, Adrian, great topic. Yeah, when you switch from one stringed instrument to another, there are aspects of technique that will transfer well and help you, but there are other aspects that need to be modified, and sometimes guitarists forget this and get into trouble on the uke. And the problems are widespread because a lot of ukulele tutors are actually guitarists dabbling in the uke as a sideline and spreading misinformation. So let's see if we can unpick the problem. In classical guitar training, day one, they tell you to put your thumb in the middle of the back of the neck. Now for classical guitar, that's a good starting point. It lets you reach your hand across that wide fingerboard to the bass strings. It lets you stretch over those wide fret spacings. On the ukulele, it's completely wrong. Unfortunately, there are dozens of tutorials out there online telling you to hold your ukulele with your thumb in the middle of the back of the neck. This is not a new problem even. I could show you books in my collection printed 100 years ago peddling the same false advice. And it comes from guitarists recycling their guitar tutorials for the ukulele without modifying them. So what's wrong with this thumb placement? Well, on a uke we have a much narrower neck, so there's never any call for your fingers to reach over this far. There's nothing there. And because the uke neck is much narrower, the only way you can play with your thumb on the back of the neck is to force your wrist to bend down and forwards, which is quite uncomfortable. So on a uke, the whole hand, wrist and arm have to come back round this way. Elbow back, heel of the hand up, wrist straighter, no superfluous finger length in front of the neck, and now your fingers can reach everything they need to without having to contort and curl back on themselves. The thumb slides round to rest on the top edge of the neck and the bottom edge rests on your first finger. This is important. That contact at the base of the first finger holds the uke in place. If you don't do this and you plant your thumb behind the neck, the only way you can keep the uke from moving around is to squeeze the neck between your fingers and thumb. And this is the biggest cause of bad uke playing in the world today. It's a small, light instrument, and pressing the strings moves the neck quite a bit, and people develop a habit of gripping to counteract that. Now, once you start gripping the neck, you'll never have any fluency in your left hand, and unfortunately there are people who play like that all their life, battling the instrument, feeling frustrated, and sadly developing strains and pains and injuries. Now on the guitar, because it's heavier and bigger, pressing the strings doesn't move the neck as much. The instrument's own weight helps keep it in place, particularly in classical guitar posture where it's wedged against your leg. It's not going anywhere, so the wise guitarist doesn't resort to squeezing too much, despite the fact that the thumb is behind the neck for stability. So here's the golden rule. Think of a straight line from your elbow across the wrist, back of the hand and first joint of the finger. Then a right angle for the middle joint of the finger, and then the top joint points directly back towards you, and you get pressure on the strings by pulling back with the biggest muscle in the arm. No effort, no tension, no squeezing with the thumb. Certain chords will demand you to deviate a bit from that, but think of this as your default starting position. And that principle applies on the guitar too. It's just that on the guitar sometimes you'll need to reach further. On a uke, you'll probably never need to get your thumb so far behind the neck that it's not visible from the front. Let's look at the right hand. Strumming action on a uke or guitar is a combination of two movements. There's the rotation of the forearm, which allows your finger to describe an arc, and there's the up and down movement, which comes from the elbow joint. Now there's a whole spectrum of combinations between these two different types of movement. On an acoustic guitar, you need a decent sized swing at the strings to make a big sound. You've got to cover some distance, and you'd likely want to think of that strumming motion as mainly from the elbow to let the whole forearm move up and down. You might want to use the rotation as a more subtle positioning to aim the strum at the top or bottom strings by arcing in towards one area, depending whether you want to emphasize the high or low end of the chord. On an electric guitar, you might not need to cover as much distance because you've got some power built into the instrument. You might be happy with, say, half rotation and half elbow. On a uke, because it's much smaller and you only have 4 strings to cover, you can actually do the whole strum as a rotation of the forearm and still have a big enough movement to make plenty of sound. So then you only need the up and down movement to add a bit of emphasis here and there. Sometimes guitarists forget this and put in a lot more effort than they need to on the uke, particularly at a fast tempo, because of course it takes a lot more energy to move the arm up and down than it does to simply rotate it on its axis. Another point, most guitarists strum nearer the bridge than a ukulele player would. On a uke, you get a nice sound somewhere near the middle of the string, whereas on a guitar, because the strings are that much longer, there's too much give in the strings at the midpoint, and you head towards the bridge for a firmer feel and a more solid tone. Now, if you get near the bridge on a uke, there's too much resistance to strum comfortably, and the sound starts to get a bit harsh. So while strumming over the sound hole might work on a guitar, it's not the best idea on a uke. Finally, let's look at picking. On the guitar, standard practice is to use the thumb for 3 strings, the E, A and D, then the first finger for the G, the second finger for the B and the third finger for the top E string. Now this works very well and it's very logical because it makes good use of the thumb, which is the strongest and most versatile digit in terms of movement. In fact, Sir Isaac Newton famously said that the human thumb alone was enough to convince him of the existence of God. That's how impressed he was by the intricacy of its design and what it's capable of. Now most guitarists, when they switch to uke, say, okay, the tuning of a uke is like the highest 4 strings on a guitar, just in a different key. So I'll use the thumb for the G string and the first, second and third fingers on the C, E and A. So they only use the wonderful thumb on the G string, and guess what? They hardly pick the G string anyway because it's tuned an octave higher relative to the guitar, and they think, oh, I've got those notes on the E string. Why bother with it? So they spend all their time picking with 3 fingers, and the highest notes, which are often the melody that needs to be emphasised the most on the A string, are left to the poor old third finger, which is the hardest digit to move independently, having fewer tendons operating it than the others. Now if you approach this like a ukulele player instead of from a guitar perspective, you say, okay, the thumb is a powerful tool, so let's take inspiration from guitar technique and use the thumb for half of the strings. So we'll use the thumb on the G and the C string, the strong first finger on the E string, and the middle finger, which is the biggest one we have, to bring out those beautiful top notes on the A string. Now that's logical. So when you approach the ukulele from a guitar background, the techniques you already know will be very useful to you, but you have to recognise the differences and modify things accordingly. Please share these videos with anyone you think can benefit from them. Keep sending the questions in and we'll see you again soon.